This is the Weigh-In Podcast by Ben Watt Chestnut and normally Sebastian Romero, but he will return at some point on this week's Weigh-In. So we talked to you about Thomas Gilman and the AJ Ferrari situation. Finally, the Weigh-In Pod is going to break the silence on the AJ Ferrari situation. You know, a lot of things to say in terms of that situation. Things that that just are that just aren't right. You know, um, and just a lot of things in terms of just that whole AJ Ferrari situation. But nonetheless, this is this week's weigh-in. So if we get right into Gilman, because Gilman is probably the short segment for today. Um, Gilman is now a coach at the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club, which tells you which basically gives us all we need to know for why he left Oklahoma. Obviously we all know that there were, what it may have been, what may have been speculated surrounding the level of Gilman, but now we very well know the level of Gilman is flat front center. And I'm going to tell you where I believe out of that. I believe got a coaching role at the wrestling club and just wanted to be a part of Team Tail. You know, that it is what it is. You can't blame Gilman for wanting that, but at the same time, I'm proud that he has got something. He's able to get a role that is very well for good for his career and just to be able to get back to coaching because, Gilman is a strength no matter where he's at. That's one thing that I think anybody could agree with is Gilman is a strength. Great coach, was able to do great things and will always be able to do great things. That's just can't say enough said that Oklahoma team did very well, and you can see it was because of those pieces that were brought in, and that's why it did so well the way it did. And I think he still played a role to that, and I think that that's very interesting and something we can't forget to highlight. That Gilman's got a good background, and you can't be nothing but thank the best for him. But wish he could have stayed with Okie. Wish he could have stayed with Okie, stayed in the Cowboys, but just wasn't in it. But if we jump on over to this AJ Ferrari, because we're gonna dump right into it. First and foremost, I got one big thing to say. So we get to just take a past and judge somebody by the past. And this there's some people out here who think, they get to just bash around AJ. Let me say it tried and true. You all can say all you want about what he may have done or what he did, allegedly, any like that. His his case was tried and dismissed. Regardless of why it was tried and dismissed, he went on, he did his thing. It went to court, it was tried, it was dismissed. Now, for everybody to go up and say, what was said that AJ Ferrari is bad for business at UNC, first of all, what you're telling us, what you're telling any fan, I'm not a fan of UNC, but what you're telling any fan of UNC is that it's not about whether it's great wrestling, it's not about the impact he can have on the rest of the team, it's not about the experience he can share. It's all about what you alums think about and what you want, you know, and that's the difference why some teams never get national titles and trophies. You turned around and you want to reject AJ Ferrari because you think I'm not, the way it always says we're not going to name names. You want to know who? Google it for the purposes of me. But you're going in and you're saying AJ Ferrari shouldn't be at your school, that he is no good, and that blah, 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 blah. that this isn't good for anything and that you don't like him and pop, 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 pop. Listen, you don't like it. A lot of people don't like AJ Ferrari for only one reason. AJ Ferrari is a very go-getting guy. Yes, he gets into altercations, but that is that is wrestling. That is wrestling. That is wrestling at its finest. And you're telling me AJ Ferrari should not have been allowed to have done this. But let me bring something up. A very good bring up. I bring this up because there are very well college athletes, and I say college athletes that have done things where they've been able to bounce back. We talk about Cam Newton, for instance. Cam Newton, started his thing off at Florida where he had some problems, whatever. Google it. You know what I say? Google it. Whatever. He moved on from it. Whatever. I don't see people going left and right. Kobe had similar problems, similar to AJ. Handled his business, did his day. That's it. Now, for you to come back as a wrestling alum and bring up old news and say, "Hey, this is old news." No, I don't want him here. He's not the top of the. He's not going to make us look good. You understand what you're doing isn't going to make you look good either, because now you're looking for every wrestler that hits UNC to be a poster boy, to be poster how you want them to be. You want them to be postered up. You want them to be perfect to your likability. If he doesn't fit in what you think is good and you think it's a bad look for UNC, but there are a lot of people that stand behind AJ. And what I don't like here is you're going off and you're saying things about AJ and you're saying this is bad for business, but you going out and doing just exactly that is saying it's bad for business. If you knew, why do you wait till after they commit him to speak up? You're a wrestling alum. You don't think, I understand coaches may or may not have conferred the alums on a decision of AJ Ferrari, but now you come out last minute and say, "Oh, I don't like this. Now I don't think this is good." Yeah, but if you knew that this was going to be a problem, why did you not go out and say it the minute you knew he hit the transfer portal? Say, "Hey, we don't want AJ. We don't want Ferrari," quietly, so it doesn't turn into what I call a media circus, where now you're putting a media circus, standing up saying this is no good, and now you're risking yourself all the way out there saying all this stuff that you're trying to keep, UNC wrestling at its best, but then you're turning around and you're saying, "Oh, this guy can't come here because he has a problem in his past that was already tried and dismissed in a courtroom." And now you're bringing that up and saying this is something that he can't be here. He can't be here. That issue was not with UNC. That issue was with Okie State and was down there. And now you're trying to turn around and say, "Hey, I'm playing judge here." You're not a judge. You don't get to play judge here. You don't get to now influence something after you see that UNC gets him, and you stood there the whole time while he was in the transfer portal and more than likely said, "Well, I don't think we're going to get him, so no big deal." Now all of a sudden you get him, and you come out, you get him, and all of a sudden it's like, "Hey, we've got AJ now. Oh no, now we don't want him here." Well, okay, why even waste somebody's time? Then in the get-go, when you saw him hit that transfer portal and the report hit your phone he was transferring, first thing they should have done, and I'm saying they because the reason why I say they is because very well in the situation that happens is because it's just a person. So I'm saying this stuff because there was time when they should have came out and said, "Hey, this is my problem. Hey, this is what's going on." And I think in very well situations, you knew that AJ was on the market, and then you wait till the team gets him, and you say, "Oh, now I don't want to. Now we don't want him here." That's just, you don't come out and you don't say something after the fact and say you're trying to say what's good for business, but now you're coming out and you're basically throwing every card you have out on a table, saying, "Hey, this isn't good for business." But what you're doing is no differently. Taking somebody's past and judging them by it is absolutely not right. It's not right in any way, shape, or form to go out and say, "Hey, this is somebody's past. This is somebody's Oh, but this is something that happened. He's not good to come here. But last we checked, it was tried and it was dismissed. Regardless of why it was dismissed, is irrelevant. It was tried, it was dismissed. That's it. That's all you need to know. Now you're going and taking that and saying, hey, there was a problem here. We need to address that. No, no. If there was an incident involving like Iowa, he was getting into it with a current team member. There's a reason why they backed out. Now, UNC, it felt like it was a matter of personal opinion. Oh, I just don't think this is good because, you know, he doesn't do this or that. There was no reason here. There was no reason to come out and say, hey, you're just taking somebody's past and saying, oh, okay. You can't sit here and say it's problematic. It's not, and I think that was just not the right move. You're going to turn around and say, hey, this is not good for you or for UNC wrestling. It's not going to look good for the legacy. What do you think you're doing does for the legacy? You're denying athletes from your personal matter of opinion. And it's personal matter of opinion. Many can disagree with me, but no, it's personal matter of opinion. I'm going to tell you why, because you're taking somebody's past and you're judging off of that. There was no incidents at UNC where you could say, hey, this was an incident involving at UNC. There was nothing. There was nothing. One person says it's bad for business, and all of a sudden, hey, they deny it. So if you had the plan to just deny it all along, why even let them commit over there? Why? And I think you're just saying that the wrestling program and the coaches can't even get to do their own job. That you're going to try to do it for them. At that point, okay, get your clipboard. You start coaching. You start coaching. If you want to turn around and tell them people they can and can't have, like you're a GM, you're not a GM. They went out, they sought after to get Ferrari. You were quiet. Then all of a sudden, as soon as they get him, now there's all this talk. We're going to deny him. Now he can't come. You had multiple chances to go out and say something, and then now you wait to the last minute and you say, not getting it. So I think in terms of UNC, I think you say Ferrari would have ruined the legacy. You have ruined the legacy at this point. You have ruined any legacy of UNC wrestling at this point. That now you're saying that you're just turning athletes away at the door because what they might have done 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and you're judging that might have happened from before. You're not taking any particulars. You're not saying, okay, we've held an admissions hearing to whether we may or may not. You're going and saying, I don't think this is good for our legacy. It's going to tarnish it. Well, what just tarnished it is what you have done. What you have done is everything that has worked for at UNC. And there have been some great wrestlers that have gone through UNC, and to turn around and say, hey, we don't want a former national champion because XYZ has happened, which was already cleared of any wrongdoing, did his day in court, did his thing in showing up, and now we turn around and say, hey, no. You can't come here because we think you're problematic. That's that ain't right. It ain't right. It ain't right. And you're gonna step up and say they can't do this. Well, you can't play GM when it comes to college wrestling. If you start turning the best athletes away at the door, and some could say, well, it wasn't the best athletes. It was one athlete. It was AJ. No, you turned away a former national champion and current All-American. There's no other current All-American. You turned away. You tried to strip his career, and you tried to play GM and say, hey, we don't need that. Unbelievable. It's just you can't do stuff like that. And you talk about what he would have ruined the legacy. 2 more years having a 2-time national champ, possibly could be a 2-time national champ. That's going to tarnish legacy. Having a 2-time national champ, that tarnishes legacy. You're going to get out and say that tarnishes legacy. That tarnishes legacy. What are you teaching little boys and little girls nowadays? What are you teaching them? So you're teaching them you make one mistake and that's it. You can never bounce back from it. You get tried and you have your day in court and you can't bounce back from it. You can always just keep being judged off the same book. I don't think that's how it works. And then, when they try to do right for themselves, no. No, I think when you talk about a legacy being ruined, right there, it was ruined. A chance to have a former national champ, current All American on their team, you turn around and you say, "Oh, no, that's going to ruin the legacy." But you came out and you ruined the legacy by shutting the door on what was a great athlete, and then you're saying, "Well, there's reasons why we did this." You know, everybody can say what they want, but nobody wants to talk about how that case was tried in court and it was dismissed. It was dismissed. You want to say AJ does this, AJ has done that, that this is that. It was tried, it was dismissed. We don't get to come back and say, well, no, 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 he still is this. No, it was tried, it was dismissed. Okay. It'd be one thing if, the case went to a trial and it was found not guilty. No, 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 no. We didn't get that far. It was dismissed. When a case is dismissed, it's dismissed for reasons, that we don't have to get into right now. It was dismissed for reasons that could be anything along being not significant evidence. It could be anything along the lines, but the case was dismissed. It was dismissed. It was, in a sense, dismissed. And you're coming back and saying, oh, no, 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 no. And, I'm not saying, anything that I'm not saying anybody has used the past, but I'm saying it's looking like a book was judged by its cover. And no way, shape, or form is what we're saying, is what we're saying on this podcast in any way capacity of what somebody said. This is just a reaction. This is just, hearsay up to what we feel. This is just hearsay at this point and how we feel. We're not going to speak to the nature of what is and what isn't, but it's hearsay, and this is just us commenting to what went on, and just you're going to talk about how what's good for a legacy, but you're turning away the doors to athletes that are really good, and you're saying, well, this isn't going to help the UNC legacy. This isn't going to help it. But what you're doing is that you're saying what you're doing isn't wrong, that what you're doing is doing that. So then that's just super interesting to say that nonetheless. And you say you're trying to keep the UNC wrestling legacy alive and that you think this is going to help towards that. But yet you're turning the door away on an athlete. And it ain't right. It ain't right. Now we can't speak to what demeanors might have happened up at UNC upon any visits or anything like that, but can't turn around and now just say, hey, we got to deny, Ferrari. We got to, I think you have to look at if you're trying to compete for a national title. Trying to compete for a national title, you have to look at a person's wrestling record, not somebody's past and outside life. If you already thought it was a concern, you would have done it the minute he hit the transfer portal saying, hey, you would have walked in maybe to a coach's office and said, hey, we don't want Ferrari. I'm just letting you know we don't want him. Don't saw after him. I don't think he's good for business at this point. Great. It would have went quietly. Then you wait till they pick him up and everything's good. And everybody's like, wow. And then you start saying, oh, no, no, no. This isn't good for UNC wrestling. This is no longer good for us now to have AJ Ferrari. But there are many others that were willing to take a chance. Many of others. Bakersfield. Iowa was on that list before, the two teammates. I feel like a book is being judged by its cover, and, whether it is or it isn't, it's how it feels. And it's just, you talk about wanting to uphold the legacy, but you're not citing there's not, there wasn't any rules to what happened. There wasn't, you tried to make it in other words, in a sense, they tried to make it quietly. They tried to have it go quietly. They tried to quietly say, hey, we're going to deny him. But, in today's media world, things do not go quietly. It's not just nobody will know who it was. No, we all do. That's why I say Google it. We all do. We all do know who it is. And to go out and say that and then don't even say, hey, well, this is my reason for it, do not even give us that front and center reason and just, oh, yeah, it says this is no good for the alumni. This is no good for UNC's legacy. I I kind of feel like no, that's not a way to go about things. That's not a way in any way, shape, or form to say, hey, this is how the wrestling should go. This is how things should go. I kind of feel like if you're gonna come out and you're gonna say something and say, hey, I think here's what I'm looking at, here's what I think we need to do. When you do stuff like that, you should be doing it in a manifest to say, hey, you know, so this is what, the Daily Tar Heel says. You know, they think signing AJ Ferrari reflects terribly on the team. It taints the legacy of UNC wrestling, something that have been building on in decades. Tony and Rob should be so blank embarrassed for themselves. This is inexcusable behavior. You know, really? Tony and Rob should be embarrassed for them? Tony Ramos, national champ should be embarrassed because they sought after a very good recruit. They should be embarrassed that he's going to taint that's just unbelievable. That you know, saying that you've been building on a legacy that has been building on decades of wrestling. I have a question. In those decades of wrestling, how many team trophies have you received? Hmm? How many team trophies? How many team trophies? Because when you talk about building on decades of a legacy, when you talk about a really good legacy, the way that this is being mentioned, you talk about Cale Sanderson, you talk about John Smith, you talk about, that's building legacy over decades. That's building infrastructure. To say that UNC is building a legacy for decades that has been, the top notch wrestling. When we talk about a legacy, we talk about Iowa having a national champion, oh so many years, or a national finalist, oh so many years. You can't come around and say they should be embarrassed for themselves, and then you have to use vulgar language when you say it. No, they shouldn't be embarrassed. They were adding more notches to that legacy. They weren't embarrassing it. That you feel embarrassed of somebody to come to your school of a national champ, current All-American? What has this come to this day and age that stuff like that happens, that now a transferring All-American gets denied because you think it's baffling to the legacy? I kind of feel like, and then says it reflects terrible on the team. So it reflects terrible to get an All-American. So what are they supposed to do? Not get transferring All-Americans anymore? So that's what you're saying? They're supposed to not get transferring All-Americans at all? That's a terrible reflect? That getting a transferring All-American is terrible on reflects terribly on the team? I think what reflects terribly on the team that you're coming out and trying to tell Tony and Rob how to do their jobs because you feel something is an embarrassment. But last I checked, that's another All-American. That's another eyes that comes to that school. Because I'm telling you what, regardless of how many may feel about AJ Ferrari, all those years away from wrestling, comes back and becomes an All-American. Tell me something. Does just anybody do that? Being an All-American is not easy. It's not easy to be an All-American. And somebody that has been away comes back, does it, and you're saying that reflects terribly on the team, and you coming out cursing left and right, that telling head coaches of a program they should be embarrassed for getting a transferring All-American. So if we have it her way, their way, we have it their way and get no transferring All-American, you think you would ever receive a team trophy? No, you wouldn't. That's a part of wrestling. The transfer portal is now a part of wrestling and college athletics. If somebody's transferring and they've got problems one place, it doesn't matter. That was tried, that was dismissed. Then you come up and now you say this is bad for business. What do you mean? What do you mean? You know, whether many may feel about Cal Bakersfield, AJ Ferrari brought him eyes again. He brought him eyes, Bakersfield. So everybody knows. Everybody knows, wow, look where he was at. He brought him some eyes. But to turn around and say, okay, this is going to reflect terribly on the team. What reflects terribly on the team is you trying to tell their coaches how to do their job, and then at the same time telling them there's a legacy involved here, but yet I don't think you understand what that is, because legacy is not something you get to just throw around. You get to just throw around saying, hey, this is something that we've been building on for decades. You might as well as use the word dynasty. Say that, the dynasty over here. I understand you're saying legacy, that it runs deep. I get it. That you're saying it's some good stuff down here, but you don't get to drop that and curse like you're Cale Sanderson or like you're Oklahoma State. You don't get to say, hey, it's deep. I get it. They have had a lot of All-Americans over the years. I get it. It is deep. It is good, but when you drop, going back and right with vulgar language, I expect you to be Cale Sanderson saying something like that, or John Smith, where you've got some significant amount of team titles under the belt, in those decades, or and I can't speak to whether they have or have not got a team title in the last, whether or not, you know, I can't depict to that. But what I can depict to is, if you're coming in and you're saying, oh, well, we got, that this is this, So one of the things we can depict here is, like I always say, if we don't have an answer, I will get one for you. So let's get one. Let's see if we can find out the answer here. And let's see. So despite let's bring this up. Let's talk about this legacy here. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about your national champs. You got CD Mock, 1982, Rob Knoll, 1988, TJ Worski, 1993, 1994, 1995. Good. Austin O'Connor, 2021, 2023. So, the highest team place finish, fifth, 1982. Sixth, 1995. Let's see. Let's see here, because we're gonna break this legacy. We're gonna break this legacy down. So when we talk about what is then 58 All Americans. You know, let's as we get our as we get our as we get our questions on. So we talk about the most All Americans, Oklahoma State. That's 494. We talk Iowa, 372. We talk about some big numbers. Let's see if we could get something here. Let's see if we could get something here. So we talk about how many schools would be out of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Now they're 20. So out of all the colleges that have All-Americans, they are 20. North Carolina State, 74 All-Americans in history. They have 58, and they talk about A.J. Ferrari is bad for their legacy. Now, look, who else was going to pick up A.J.? Iowa, right? How many All-Americans does Iowa have? 372 All-Americans. Well, they didn't think anything was bad for their legacy. They let him go over there. If it wasn't for getting into it with his teammate, they let him go over there. So why is it 58 All-Americans? It's bad for the team, and the coaches should be embarrassed. Well, I think we need to look at the standard here. Iowa wasn't doing that. Bakersfield wasn't doing that. So what gives you the right to come up in here and say, hey, you should be embarrassed. You should be embarrassed. He reflects poorly on the team. 372 All-Americans didn't think so at Iowa. But 58 All-Americans says, yeah, this speaks poorly. We have been building for decades of a legacy. Listen, those first maybe 10 schools that I listed off, that's decades of a legacy. 58 All-Americans, it looks like you're just starting to build something. That's what it looks like to me. That's just one way to look at it. But nonetheless, this is this week's episode of The Weigh-In, just had to get that out there. People can disagree or agree with my opinion. At the end of the day, we're just a podcast. We look at what's at hand. In regards to this AJ Ferrari situation, we did not extensively say, okay, what happened in Oklahoma? No, we're looking at the athlete here. We're looking at the athlete. We're not looking at the cover of just the book. We're looking at more here, than that. So with all that being said, this is The Weigh-In by Benoit Chestnut and normally Sebastian Romero, but he will return at some point, and like, comment, subscribe, share it. We'll continue to bring you guys, I will continue to bring you guys these videos as we continue the streak, which I have felt, which has been getting episodes up every day this week. And with that being said, Weigh-In out.